Good afternoon, Jim. I will tell you this much: I could be having the worst day possible, and as long as I have that riff going and the drum beat, and I get to see you bobbing and dancing, it doesn't cease to put a smile on my face. At least I think that sounded like I meant it. So, how are you, sir?
I'm good, man. And I had to say, I think we're 15 months into us recording and using that same intro music, and I will admit that it does give me a little it makes me feel good when I hear that music, because I know that we're doing the RUCKCast, and so
that's good.
It does make me feel good, and the fact that it has that nice little that little section where it kind of fills in and everything. Yeah, it's all good.
Always, it's good stuff. It is. I can't even remember where I found it, but it does get a copyright hit. But we've attributed it to the right person. So if you're looking for the music, gentleman's name's Alex Grohl. Yeah. It's tagged in the show notes. So we're what's the word I'm looking for? Not copacetic. Is it copacetic? Maybe, I don't know. That's a really big word for us to use. I shouldn't use that. We're in compliance. Yeah. We're in compliance.
We are in compliance. Yes, so, that is the word that we can get behind.
But shout out to Alex for some really killer music, and I don't know him, so I have no idea any of him. I'm sure he won't listen to this unless he's checking his copyright claim. So, but thank you. So now that we've gone off the rails in under 2 minutes, as per usual, what is on our agenda today?
Well, if you're a short-time listener of the show or a long-time listener of the show, you probably know and realize that I like to refer back to things. And we were talking about on our last episode, which was part of our 10 things we'd like you to know about Wi-Fi, that series, we're talking about defaults. And during that episode, we were talking about residential defaults, because that came up. And during that episode, I said we could do an entire episode just about residential defaults and why they are the way they are, and what that causes and stuff like that. And so in order to kind of keep things sort of together, if you will, I was hoping that we could take a little bit of time today and maybe we spend some time talking about residential defaults and what that looks like, what that means, and maybe even we can sort of go into how they differ from enterprise. And then we could maybe wrap it up with what happens when we put enterprise gear, like you and I do, into our residential home. Like there's a lot of Ruckus people that use Ruckus in their houses. What that really means. So that's kind of what I was thinking. I mean, unless you have an objection or something else.
I dig it. I mean, at the end of the day, like I can't speak for well, I mean, I know kind of how you got into the wireless world, not necessarily Wi-Fi, but I mean, I would assume for most of the people that listen and most of the people that work in Wi-Fi now, chances are you probably got your start in residential Wi-Fi. And I don't mean installing. I mean, like you live at home, you live in a residence. That's the Wi-Fi we first play with, right? That's our first exposure to it. And at some point we thought we knew what we were doing. And now, I mean, I know for a fact, 10 years later, that I had everything wrong. I mean, I like that. I talk about this in my RCWA class, both times I've taught it now, and I've talked about it other times as well. But like, you look at, I'm not going to name names, I'm not going to vendor shame or anything like that, but you look at some of the home targeted devices, and some of them have very simple GUIs. There's a reason why they do that. Obviously, they want to be accessible to the masses, but it's got like good, better, and best for Wi-Fi. And naturally, you're going to pick best, right? But when you actually get into the advanced settings and you understand what you're looking at, like when you finally know what you're looking at, you realize that the best setting is actually like 80 megahertz wide channels at full power, like everything wrong if you knew what you were actually doing with Wi-Fi. Everything wrong. And of course, they do like to throw 2.4 at like channel 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you ever, I'm not going to dig it up now because it was a couple years ago, but I can't remember if it was on Slack or Twitter, and somebody posted like the actual chat they had with that vendor's tech support, and they were like, well, just move it to channel 2. Like, I understand they're not hiring CWNEs to do the support, but it's just, yeah, I mean, Residential defaults are going to be fun.
Well, I'll go ahead and say it because you didn't. I will tell you that my first memory of Wi-Fi was residential, but it was when I had just moved in to a house and we didn't have the internet set up. And I was like, wait a second, I have this laptop that has this other way to connect built into it. And I remember sitting at my kitchen table, which is right next to a window on the side of the house, and stealing my neighbor's Wi-Fi. So that was, I think, hopefully the statute of limitations on using your neighbor's Wi-Fi because they didn't put a password on it is, hopefully that statute of limitations is less than 20 years because that's been more than 20 years since I've done that.
Is it really stealing if they didn't put a password on it though? I mean, it's that you were borrowing with no intent to return.
Well,
it's like the video I sent you, and I mean, for the life of me, I don't know if it's fake. If it was, I mean, I hope it was staged. But with the old British gentleman going to his neighbor's house, knocking on the door, and being like, "I need the password." And he's like, "What are you talking about?" He's, you changed the password. I can't get to my Wi-Fi. He's like, "What do you mean your Wi-Fi?" He's like, "Yeah." I don't know if we should link that to the show notes, but it's been all over Twitter and social media. So it's one of those things where, like, if you don't secure your network, is it really stealing? Now, if I hacked it, it's steal. But I mean, we're not going to get into. This is not a morality show today. Don't worry about it. Yeah. But yeah, I think I can absolve you of that sin.
Look, yeah, somebody had to say it. Look, because I can.
But it's true. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the beauty part of Wi-Fi in congested areas, right? I mean, we deal with this in office spaces all the time. But when you put yourself in a home, whether it's a crowded neighborhood, an office, not an office tower, like an apartment building, condo development, or whatever, odds are you can turn on a scanner. And I know this is segueing into what you've got planned for us, but you can turn on a Wi-Fi scanner if you have the right tools, and you can see probably half your development's Wi-Fi, if not more. And if you don't want to be paying for Wi-Fi and you know what you're doing and your neighbor is either really, really nice or really, really lazy, chances are you can probably borrow some of that Wi-Fi. And the reality too is, I mean, at the end of the day, I've never looked for it, but I'd be willing to bet that the default passwords for a lot of the vendor routers that you're getting from like the ISPs has been cracked. I mean, it's not hard. It's not there's got to be a pattern to it. I'm sure somebody out there has figured it out. And most people don't bother changing the defaults. So, well, or maybe not most, but a lot. But anyways, back to the defaults.
Defaults and residential defaults. Let's get into that. So in the last episode, we were talking about the default settings in enterprise Wi-Fi and how sometimes those aren't always the best, but you got to put something in there. And so let's talk about residential Wi-Fi because that was the topic we were talking about. And I like showing this off. This is not the first time I've shown off Wi-Fi Explorer Pro.
Thank you, Adrian.
From Intuitive Bits. If you do Wi-Fi, a little plug for Adrian and his stuff. If you do Wi-Fi, if you're interested in Wi-Fi, you have to go check out Wi-Fi Explorer Pro. It's now out for Windows. Version 1.1 was just released. I'm not even sure what the one for Mac is up to versioning wise at this point. But if you do Wi-Fi, if you're interested in Wi-Fi, you got to go get these tools because they are just invaluable when we're doing this work.
Yeah, and I can't remember, but I thought he used to have a free version, didn't he? A light version? I stick to the Pro.
This is the Pro. There are other versions the Pro is nice because I'm actually using a WLAN Pi because I'm too smart to use Wi-Fi as a when I'm doing work. I actually cable in my network into my laptop, so I have to use a WLAN Pi. And if you look up at the very top up here, which I can't seem to get my mouse to go all the way up there on the screen, but if you look up there at the very top, you'll notice that it says my home WLAN Pi is where I'm scanning, which is cool. We don't now this it gives me the ability to do that. There are there's a light version. There's educational discounts. There's lots of different things, but just go check it out.
And the reality is I'm not trying to spend anybody's money, but the Pro version is not I mean, it's an investment, but it's one of those where you buy it and you never look back. It
I
comes in
have,
handy, especially if you're in Wi-Fi.
I have, yeah, especially if you're in Wi-Fi. I have no problems. I don't even question it anymore. I just, it's so worth it. But we're here to talk about different settings. And I'm first off, we're going to take a look at these two little lines that are down here. I really need to stop sharing just the app and just share my screen. But anyway, you'll notice that in 5 gigahertz, there's actually some 20 megahertz wide channels down at 120 and 128, it looks like, down here. Now, those are my labs. And so I'm actually trying to be a good steward of the space, even though I do have extra space in there. And I do that because if you take a look at the rest of the spectrum, and I got a little filter up here called Exclude Ruckus. And so we can actually take out all of my networks and we can look at just everybody else that's around the neighborhood. And we can see.
I really see somebody running a 40 megahertz wide 2.4 channel, don't I?
So the other this is the cool thing about Adrian's tools is we'll take a look at, I have a filter up here called BadFi right above the signal column. There's a tool called BadFi. Yep.
So bad.
And this is a Vantiva. Let's see. We can see that they're running at a transmit power of 24. There's actually 2 different ones in here that have been identified with my filter of BadFi, which is they're on either 40 megahertz wide at 2.4 or they're not on 1, 6, and 11. And so this one happens to be channel 6, but there's also somebody running at channel 10. So channel 6 at 40, and then this network right up here that decided that they wanted to run 40 megahertz wide channel bandwidths. You see that column right there. So yeah, there is some BadFi, but if we come back here, we take a look at this, what you'll notice is, I can see a lot of networks from my house. And luckily, most of the 2.4s, we can actually filter on just the 2.4 for a second. We'll notice that for the most part, with the exception of our one person, they're all 20 megahertz. So I have to kind of tip my hat a little bit to most defaults. You can see the vendor over here on the right-hand side. It got the Ubiquiti, Netgear, TP-Link, Google. They're, for the most part, their defaults seems like they're cleaning it up a little bit. We can, when those 2 people that decided to go off of the defaults, but it looks like the majority of them are all kind of set on channel 1, which is not great. Let's see, we can take a look at and we can see that on channel 1, there are 38 networks with a 22% beacon overhead. Channel 6 has 32 networks with 31% beacon overhead. So there's your problem with 2.4 in residential is these 3 lines right here. You can see them. They're all kind of poor. So that's a problem with 2.4, right? So, but at least in this section, in this point, but as you were talking about earlier, the ones that are advertising their transmit powers, they're all transmitting at max power. Now, this is important when you think about it, because in a residential environment, how many devices are acting as an AP in their network? I mean, think about it. I mean, I have 3 APs in my house that runs my network. My neighbors behind me, they have 2, thanks to some other stories that we won't tell today. But for the most part, everybody has 1. They got 1 device that's acting as their AP, and it's got to cover their entire house because they advertise it as whole home. It's like, and they're like, we can get better coverage, and now you can get all these advertisements, right? And this is really at the heart of why residential Wi-Fi defaults are the way they are, is because they have 1 chance, they have 1 device in order to fulfill all their marketing claims. And so their defaults, because to your point, how many people go in and change the defaults? I mean, they'll go in and they'll change the name.
Yeah,
But
you've got, I think you've got like three or four types of people that are going to be mucking around with home networks. People like us who know exactly what to do, and we're not putting in consumer gear anymore. People who think they're like us, who think they know what they're talking about, and who will spout off on LinkedIn or Twitter that they know what they're doing, and then somebody like Jake will come along and say, "You're wrong, and here's why." And I love Jake. It's not a knock on Jake. It's actually, I enjoy reading those because it's like somebody had to tell them. And then
Yeah.
you've got the people that will just let the ISP person come and install it and leave it at is. The post-it note will be given to them with the default password of XYGQ123, like whatever's off the back of the router, and that's it. And then you'll have the people that'll take it from the ISP and just change the password so that they don't have to type out that gobbledygook. Those four types of people. So yeah, most of those people are leaving the defaults or barely changing the defaults because they don't have a clue. They think the defaults. I'm going to get myself in trouble, but I'm going to say it. Most of the people that aren't us trust that the people that are installing it know what they're doing.
Right. And here's the thing is they actually kind of do.
Usually. I mean, I've met enough of the installers and they actually do for the most part. But I love it when the guy came to install my link and he was trying to sell me on a whole home Wi-Fi solution with all the little extenders and all that. And then I opened my network closet and he goes, "Yeah, here's your router. I'll leave you alone."
Yeah.
So, it wasn't even a flex. He just, he knew he had no shot.
But here's the thing, right? And this goes back to our 10 things about Wi-Fi thing. It's all about the requirements, right?
I'm sure.
What are the requirements? And now you might think you know what the requirements are for residential Wi-Fi, but we think of it as a technical requirement of what is required. But I propose, and my theory has always been, well, there's also a business requirement along with residential Wi-Fi. And a lot of it has to do with one of the columns that I have called out here. And it's called max rate. So here, for the time being, let me minimize, maybe. Here we go. We'll minimize the screen and we're going to take a look at, so we have the BSSID, we have the AP name, and then we have the max rate, right? Take a look at the max rate. 1733 megabits per second, 2402 megabits per second, right? That is the requirement. And then you have this guy right here. Oh, wait. That's a Roku TV that snuck its way into my house. But anyway, we won't go there. But if you notice, it's a nice little point because what we're seeing is the max rate on this guy, which happens to be 20 megahertz wide, is 72.2 megabits per second. Now, if you are selling gigabit Wi-Fi as a business model to a whole bunch of residential people, and yet they cannot get more than 72.2 megabits per second as their max rate, that's a problem. That's a problem for your business. So, but if you're selling gig Wi-Fi, and we'll pick on this particular one down here that I've highlighted, we'll see that their max rate is 2402, so 2.4 gigabits per second. And you'll notice the transmit power over in this column. The transmit power right about here is 30, right? So it's doing a 30 dBm oh, now it's gone, or dropped down my list down into here. But when you take a look at some of these other transmit powers, they're very high. And they do that because they're trying to cover the entire house. And they have these max rates of 24, 2400, 1300, depending on the generation. And that generation will then change these max rates. But more importantly, what you'll notice is for the most part, except for my lone Rogue Roku TV that's beaconing out as an AP, all these data rates are above 1 gigabit per second. And that's because it gives those client devices, the people that or they're like, oh, I need to have the latest and greatest. I need to have, the best. I need to upgrade my phone every single year because a new phone came out. I need to get the latest Wi-Fi. I need to get all this other stuff. And then I need to go in and I need to give my SSID, a cute little name like,
is it me you're looking for?
Is it me you're looking for? Here it is right there.
So one thing real quick, and not to defend the Roku, but it's actually worth mentioning. That could be the Roku offering its Wi-Fi for the remote control. There are a lot of other devices out there in a home that people don't realize are broadcasting Wi-Fi. And I'm not up on the streaming devices, but Roku's used to do it for the remotes. I think the Chromecast used to do it for the remotes.
Yep.
Sometimes, depending on the scanners, I don't think it'll show up on Adrian's tool, but I think it'll show up if you pull out a Fluke. Video game controllers, your printers. Generally speaking, your printers, because they want to advertise like smart printing that connects to your phone and the app, they put out their own Wi-Fi. So there's a lot of things other than the home networks too. But where I was going originally before that popped in my head was I hear this, and to me, I just want to blame marketing. Marketing is the reason why the home defaults are the way they are. But the ironic thing is, if people actually got everything together, right, they'd sit there and say, okay, I don't need one router to rule them all, unless I've got a small apartment or something like that. I might need like a base station and a couple, we don't sell them, but like, more than one AP per house, right? And it's an opportunity for some of these ISPs to sell more gear. And I honestly think they're starting to get onto that because, I've installed my ISP drop, I think 3 years ago now, and that was what they were offering me. It wasn't like a one AP. It was like, we're going to sell you this and base station and it's mesh, but whatever. I think they're getting smarter to it. It's the idea of like the in-house speakers, right? You want to play the music where you can hear it in every room in the house. Do you crank the speaker to 11? Or do you actually have wired speakers, or in this case, wireless speakers in every room that you want to hear the music in, so that you can have it at a tolerable level where you hear it, but your neighbors don't want to kill you? Same idea.
Mm-hmm. And so, to your point, here's an HP.
Mm-hmm.
An HP. There's actually two different printers that we can see here.
Yep, and the one above it's a speaker.
One's
the Polk is a speaker.
And so there's all these different things, and so to your point, it's all about marketing, right? Marketing, because if we were to take a look at the bad fi, let me come back into here. On a 40 megahertz wide channel, you can get 600 megabits per second, which is really, really good. And for most homes, it's actually all you need. However, and you can get that on a 40 megahertz wide channel, right? So when we take a look at residential Wi-Fi, get rid of this. We'll take a look at just the residents, right? We could actually get, if they were, say, set the defaults to 40, then you could get 600 megabits per second, or whatever that number ends up working out, which would solve most residential Wi-Fi, because now instead of having everybody down at Uni 1 with this, giant block down here, or a giant block up at the top where everybody's, stepping on each other, you could actually make residential Wi-Fi faster if they defaulted to 40 megabits or 40 megahertz wide channels as opposed to an 80. However, that the math right here, this max rate that tells us 2.4 gigabits per second, is what ends up driving all of these. Now, the last thing I want to get into real quick has to do with, well, why are they on Uni 1 and Uni 3? It's kind of hard to see with this screen, but if you look down at those bottom numbers, what you'll see is there's some white numbers that are on the sides, but that center section is all blue numbers. And what you'll notice is all the blues are empty. And this is an old antiquated thing that comes from DFS, because those are the DFS channels. And for a while, DFS was not allowed because we got in trouble. The Wi-Fi industry got in trouble for some things that happened that we won't cover today. And so there's a lot of devices that for a period of time would support 5 gigahertz, but they would not support Uni 2, which is all those blue numbers there across the bottom. And so in order to cut down on support calls on why does my my little box that my router that I get from my ISP that I rent each month on my bill. Why does that, why doesn't it work for, it works for some of my devices, but not all of my devices? And it's like, well, because, you have an old device that might only support Uni 1 and Uni 3. So what happens is they're really by this by these two different things converging. We need to have a high max rate, but we need to be able to support all the residential devices. When you take those two things and you put them together, you end up with these defaults in residential Wi-Fi that have you all stuck on Uni 1 or all stuck on Uni 3, and you completely ignore Uni 2. And if we could get past that, then residential Wi-Fi would be so much better. But because of these two different defaults that we have, and the funny thing is if you go and you look at the hardware, you're talking about usability of people that actually do log into their network, into their routers and look at stuff. They're not even allowed to select Uni 2. Yeah, it's not there. The settings just aren't there.
The last time I think I had a vent, like before I completely not literally cut the cord, but until I finally cut myself off of using vendor supplied equipment. The last time I went into a GUI, it might have been my current one, actually. I think I went in one time just for kicks to see what I could or could not do. And the amount of stuff, the amount of nerd knobs they prevented you from turning was disgusting. Like you literally had nothing. You couldn't do anything other than like, I think I had the ability to like run a speed test to verify that my service was getting the speeds. And full disclosure, my vendor, I'm not naming names, I can't get a speed test to hit the actual speeds unless I run it through their router. I mean, it's whatever, but it's I get it on the one hand, right? Okay, so going back to the default discussion, and I don't think we actually said this on that call, on the podcast, probably said something similar. Just because you can doesn't mean you should, and defaults is a perfect example of that. Just because you can change something doesn't mean you should change something, because at the end of the day, some of the things are great to change. Default channels, bandwidth, channel width, power can be changed in the right direction and improve things. But there are things like beaconing and hiding your SSID that can be changed, but really shouldn't, because they don't do anything other than probably break stuff. Hiding your network does not do a thing other than like it'll show up. You see on Jim scrolling, there's a whole bunch of hidden networks. It's not secure. It's not more secure. It doesn't remove the beacon from the overhead. You're still doing the same stuff. It doesn't clean up the Wi-Fi. So I get it if they're hiding that to prevent people that, like, your mother, your grandmother, whatever, who has no clue other than she wants to be able to FaceTime the grandkids. I get it, because if you hide it from her, she can't break stuff, and then it cuts down on support calls. But it's to me, I lost all the control, and I'm like, I'm glad I pulled out my MikroTik, and that runs my network, and I'm happy with that, because I can do everything I want with that, and I have all the control in the world. So,
well, let's go back to requirements. Right?
Sure.
Because the requirements for this really drives these settings that we're looking at, these default settings. But you remember when I said it wasn't a technical requirement that was driving this? It was a business requirement. The business requirement for residential and ISP networks is for the end user to not call the ISP. That is their requirement. So all these hidden networks that we're looking at right here, most of them are for the techs, for the people that you call to come out. There's all these other things that are happening. And so if you don't see them, when you go, hey, show me the network, and you don't see all these hidden networks that I have listed here, then you don't ever ask the question, why are there these three other odd networks that I see coming off of my ISP? And this is a problem in 5 gigahertz, because each one of these networks then is a beacon that takes up time on the channel. That's why this tool, having beacon overheads, when we take a look at, channel 157 and 5 gigahertz has 19% beacon overhead. It's because they have these other hidden networks. They beacon out. They just don't have the name in the beacon. The beacon's still there. It's still working. And so that is where the problem comes in. But the funny thing is, I like to play around with this tool, is you then get to see networks like this one that I've highlighted. Sim & Jerry 2.4 5G extension that has a transmit power of 63 dBm, which seems like a lot to me. I mean, I I don't know about everybody else watching, but 63 dBm transmit power seems like
that doesn't seem kosher to me.
That does not seem very kosher to me, but it's fun. It's fun. Residential's fun because you get to see all these other things. I can't find it, but I used to have one of my neighbors that had a DTM period. Oh, here's a DTM period of 3.
Yeah, don't do that.
Don't do what?
Don't change. Nice. Don't change some of those. Like I was looking at the beacon interval. Like if you have a neighbor that changed their beacon interval, go smack them.
Well, they did. That's what I'm trying to find, because I had a neighbor that had a beacon interval of 33 milliseconds and a DTM of 33. And I wanted to go hunt him down with my tools and knock on the door and be like, "Hey, on behalf of Wi-Fi professionals everywhere,
don't do that. Bad idea.
Why did you do that?" Just and we like to know why.
And the reality is, unless they're going to bust out their CWE card, which we don't actually get cards, but unless they're going to bust that out, in which case we're going to name and shame, like chances are they thought it was something that might improve it, and there's probably some AI generated explanation that thinks it might improve it, but really and truly, if you change the beacon interval, it's a standard, you're going to break stuff. So to kind of bring it home, because I know we're kind of running out of it. We're trying to be helpful. This isn't a part of the 10 thing series, but it's an extension of that, if you will. Call it a stray dog, whatever. We'll title it when it comes around to Tuesday. But for the people at home that aren't graced with the fact that they live with or have a neighbor who is a CWE or a wireless nerd, what's a good thing for us to recommend to them so that they can actually have better Wi-Fi at home, even with using sort of the default vendor supplied equipment?
The best thing that I say this all the time, because there's so little you can adjust with the vendor supplied equipment. The one thing that, and I'll tell you this gets into a whole other social media thing. There are a lot of people who buy Ruckus gear specifically so that they can get out of these Uni 1, Uni 3, quagmires of channels, and mess. But the other thing to keep in mind, if you're really looking to do something and you're not ready to buy enterprise grade gear, is you have to, the one thing you can take a look at is get a tool. There's some free tools that will run on Android that you can kind of go, like a Wi-Fi scanner tool, stuff like that. And take a look at, so we joke about, having different channels, but if we look at Uni 3, we'll sort it down here on this side, and we take a look at those 4 channels, 149, 153, 157, 161. What you'll notice here is that the majority of my neighbors are on either 157 or 161. Now, while you'll have overlapping networks, across all of, and you can see that in these 4 numbers right here, the 37, 48 and 41. The best thing that you could do that I could recommend is, if you're stuck in Uni 1, Uni 3, find one of these channels that has the least number of networks on it. In my case, 153 only has one network on channel 153. Because at least at that point, your beacons aren't competing with other people. And so then your AP, well, you're still going to have to, worry about other things. At least, if you can shift off of that one channel 157, or if we look down at Uni 1, channel 44, it looks like all the defaults are on channel 44 and channel 157. That's the one thing you can do, is you can change your channel to either 36 or change it to 140, or 149. I'm sorry. Change it off of because that's a different channel still within that same uniband that you're allowed to do. And it will allow your beacons to not have to compete against other beacons. And so at least at that point, you can still talk on a 20 megahertz wide channel for smaller data, and you'll be fine. Run a lot better.
No, and I would say the 2 things I would say, first and foremost, and I know we've talked about it before. We've had to have mentioned it on a prior episode, but if you're dealing with a large house, it may be worth looking at, if you're not willing to fork over the money for And you can go on, I'm sure it's on eBay or whatever. You can find some slightly used, gently used enterprise grade gear from Ruckus or similar that could do it. But otherwise, one of those mesh solutions, and I'm not going to advocate for anyone. I've never used any of them, but I know people who have. I think one of the folks that works at Hamina recommended one brand for family members because he just didn't want to deal with it. And it was easy and painless. Mesh, you lose a little bit on the far end, but not a lot, and it's worth it. Otherwise, if you're dealing with an apartment or a smaller home, don't jack up the power. Don't do that. But put the AP, put the device, the router that's broadcasting your Wi-Fi, put it in the central location. Put it as close to the main use areas as possible, and don't put it next to like your HVAC. So things like that. Move it as close to you as possible, and you'll be fine.
The other thing is, putting it behind your TV, putting it right next to other electronics, not a great idea. Give it a little bit of space. You want to have, and if you can go vertical, get it below your TV. If you have to have it near the TV, get it below there. You want vertical separation. Get it away from anything else that generates. It's electronic. Yeah. Get it away from that.
So what I'm hearing, Jim, is like Wi-Fi is like a fine wine. You've got to let it breathe a little bit.
You do have to let it breathe. The last thing I'll talk about with when you brought up mesh, look for a mesh solution that has 2 5 gigahertz radios, because it'll do the mesh backhaul on one of those 5 gigahertz. And if they've done it right, they'll actually put the mesh, as you can see here. If we take my junk out of it again, they'll put the mesh in that giant wide open space that you have. So you have this great mesh backhaul in Uni 2, but it'll still do client serving on those ends on Uni 1 and Uni 3.
Yeah, and I think the other thing now, not that you want to spend for it, but with 6 gigahertz now in the last year or two, I haven't looked. I'm not in the market for them. I don't need to. I wire everything, but I know there's probably some mesh solutions out there that are leveraging the 6 gigahertz as well. So
that's a topic for a different day. But yeah, if you can do mesh in 6 gigahertz, because here we'll take a look at it.
It's wide open.
Another plug for the WLAN Pi. I'm able to see 6 gigahertz using a laptop that does not have 6 gigahertz. Again, when you take a look at the difference between what we see at 6 gigahertz and what we see happening at 2.4 and 5 gigahertz, this difference right here, this is what 6 gigahertz, whether you only get Uni 5, which is, you can see it right here, Uni 5 right here in this section, whether you only get Uni 5 in your regulatory domain or not, there's a lot of empty space in Uni 5. Yeah. No, might not be all that you have.
Give us time. Else. We'll screw it up, but I have faith.
But with lower transmit powers, right?
Yeah.
With these lower transmit powers, because if you look, this transmit power, and I have I actually reset all my 6 gigahertz stuff earlier today, so I don't have any Ruckus 6 gigahertz running at the moment. But if you look, the transmit power for my neighbors is at 20. When we take a look at 5 gigahertz, those transmit powers are 23s. So it's at least 3 dB, if not, there's a 26 right here. You're looking at 3 to 6 dB less transmit power, which means 3 to 6 dB less signal going outside of the home. So we have a big, standard power is great, but for residential, it might be a good thing that we keep it at a, and if you take a look, regulatory info, this little column right there, we can see that the one network that I can see off of the one AP is an indoor access point. Yeah, you can see it right there.
But that looks, that's heaven on earth right there for a Wi-Fi.
It is. That's great. That's the great thing about 6 gigahertz.
Yeah. So I would say if you happen to know somebody in your neighborhood who's a nerd, maybe he's a Wi-Fi nerd or she's a Wi-Fi nerd, buy him a beer, offer him a drink, get him a snack, and they'll impart knowledge. I know, Jim, you've done this before. We've shouted out your neighbors. Some of your neighbors are smarter about Wi-Fi because you just happen to move in that neighborhood. It's not hard to find some of the resources. That's why I actually pointed out that Adrian has a light tool that's free. Pro. I don't know the prices. We're not going to get into it. I'm not a salesman for Adrian stuff. It's worth the investment because you get to see all of this and you can find better Wi-Fi without going crazy and spending without necessarily spending thousands of dollars on new equipment and bigger circuits and stuff like that. You spend a couple $100 max on one of these bits of software, and some of the Android tools and things like that are actually free. And you spend a little bit of time understanding what you're looking at, and you can get some really good home Wi-Fi for not minimal investment other than time, and it's well worth it. You can see a lot of people just throw it up, throw money at it until it works, and they don't care. And the reality is they didn't need to. So that's why it was good. It was a good tangent to go off of. It created a whole separate episode. And I'm glad that I don't have to run anything other than carrier grade Wi-Fi at home. So, but I'm spoiled.
If only just to get you into Uni 2.
But well, I got some Wi-Fi 7 stuff burning a hole in a box next to me, so I think that's going to go next. But new cables first. That's a different topic for a different day.
Ooh, that is a good topic.
It is. I think it's actually, that's a worthwhile topic. I had a conversation with somebody about that yesterday, and their eyes opened wide when I said, you really have to start thinking about the cabling. But anyways, I think that's a good point for us to stop at today, Mr. Palmer. I don't know if you have anything else to send us home with.
No, just we'll put some show notes in there for some different tools that you might want to invest and look at to try to give you an idea of what's actually happening around your neighborhood and in your Wi-Fi. Because, it's kind of fun to take a look at.
In a completely non-creepy way.
You just don't tell anybody.
Yeah, well, then we're going to get into war driving, and then just that's probably something for another channel. I don't think we can even talk about that one here. But anyways, we'll catch you on the next one, sir.
Yeah.
Without getting us in trouble, we'll call it a wrap, and we'll see everybody on the next one. Hey there. Thanks for listening. If you liked our show and haven't yet done so, please like and subscribe. If you want to contact the show directly, you can email us at ruckcast@comscope.com. Jim and I both read those emails. To learn more about any Ruckus products or services that we've talked about on this or any other prior podcast, please check out our About section of the show or the show notes. And as always, thank you for listening.